This daily exercise drawing subject is the front portico of the Art Gallery of New South Wales. On a glorious Sydney winter day, would you believe, from the look of that blue sky and the sunshine. So it's a fairly standard neoclassical pedimented ionic columned portico. The angle I took the photo from and the closeness I was gives it some distortion, some camera distortion that really wasn't there in life, but it does add a certain sense of drama to the scene. So I decide to not remove it as I draw it, but to include it. So I'm wanting this to be a 15-minute drawing. So I'm drawing fairly briskly and I'm just pushing through at this point a few inaccuracies that I'm aware that I've made with what I've done so far. But I'm thinking it's just an exercise. I mustn't get precious with it. And I add a few people at the base of this column that I'm doing now just to reserve the space and to give me a sense of scale and to remind myself as I draw the rest of this that I'm drawing a whole scene. I'm not just drawing a building, even though the building is obviously the dominant part of this. Now, in the end, this drawing took me 25 minutes to do, so I will just warn you that, but it was partly because I wasn't happy with it and I was trying to look at it and to consider, are there some ways I can overcome the issues that I have with it. One of which at the moment is that the centre of the three columns I've drawn doesn't tilt in a very sympathetic alignment to its partners on each side. But that's the sort of detail I always presume I can massage slightly as I move on with this, particularly with those shadows that sit behind that column. So probably the biggest challenge with a scene such as this is to get the overall proportions of this portico correct. If we consider it as a rectangle with a triangle on top, to get the rectangle in the right proportion, to not have it too wide and too low or too high and too narrow. So it's to keep those proportions correct. And I am looking at this stage thinking, well, that's okay because most of these columns have got darkness on each side. And so in the massive line work that's going to be there by the end, I know that I can bring it across. So I've now got the final column in place. And now to put the entablature on top. And then the pediment. Now, pay attention to, no, I'm not going to draw it yet. I'm actually going to write the Art Gallery of New South Wales on. You'll notice that I like to start in the centre of any inscriptions and to try not to see them as words, but to see them as shapes that need to be put in a certain space with a certain amount of proportion, foreshortening affecting them. And you'll notice how much the pediment, the triangular section on top, overhangs the ends of the corners. These are the details that I consistently see inaccurately drawn on so many drawings. And again, with these decorative rectangles, little boxes, notice that the perspective changes, that the one that's right in front of us is almost coming straight out at us, but the one on the extreme left is angled. It's spread in those perspective angles, which are also important details. And they also happened to that similar feature that's under the top of the pediment, under the top of the sloping triangular structure on top. Those same skinny boxes are also affected by perspective in the same way. The angle that they sit at lessens and becomes more vertical as it moves from left to right. If we get those details right, we won't notice it at all. But if we get them wrong, then there'll be something looking not quite right, which may be difficult to work out exactly what it is, but we'll realise that something's just not quite right. So now I've got the two large banners which are advertising the Archibald Prize, an an annual portraiture prize from the Art Gallery of New South Wales, which was the reason we had gone in to see that exhibition as an annual event that we do. And now considering something of the decoration, something of the building that sits behind. So we continue this. So there were a few things that didn't turn out the way I expected with this. One of them was a very careless error I'm yet to make, and it is the sort of error that I just couldn't believe I made it. It really was a rookie error, as they say. Well, it really was a careless error, in fact, and it did reinforce to me the wisdom of one of the things I endlessly say we should do when we draw, and that I need to pay more attention to myself sometimes. And it was right towards the end of the drawing, and I think that's part of the problem. I'm paying less attention. I'm thinking of exactly what I'm going to do after I finish the drawing, and so I cease to take the same care that I've taken in most of the drawing up till now. Gosh, and I'm just looking at that line that sits above the doorway, and it is too horizontal. It needs to slope down towards the left a bit. But fortunately, by the time I put the shading in behind the columns, it won't be such a problem. Now, one of the problems I did have, and you'll see it shortly, is that when I put the vertical hatch lines, as I'm fond of using, in behind the columns, I found the columns basically disappeared. That because I did vertical lines for the fluting, it really disguised the columns once the hatching was done behind. The fluting just looked like more hatching. So if I were doing this again, I would probably not put any lines in for the fluting on the columns. I would just leave them as smooth columns to create the effect of the light and the dark that we have very strongly in the photo. Or what I could possibly do would be to use a 0.1mm pen. I'm using a Copic Multiline, a 0.2mm pen here, and do the lines as lightly as I could. Now you'll notice now the columns disappear as I do the hatching. I mean, if not disappear, but they become far less visually prominent, and we lose the wonderful sunshine effect that having them left without lines on them now would have created. And it's another good reason why sometimes it's more helpful to leave the detail until later in the drawing. Work at getting the overall elements of the drawing in place, and then start with the detail that's most important and work to the detail that's less important. And I think one of the details that is most important in this is actually the shadow and the shade of behind the portico. Now, in a moment, you'll see me, now I'm doing one of the really big mess-ups, which is with those stairs. I did not look at the reference to check the angles, and if I had, and I should have focused on the fact that eye level is in the steps, and so the steps actually start to slope in the opposite direction to all the other angled lines, horizontal lines in this scene. And instead, I made eye level even lower, as if I'm on ground that's now sloping down away from the gallery and on my knees almost. And while in some ways it still works, it wasn't the effect I was trying to do. I was trying to draw this accurately, and I just haven't paid attention. And in fact, I have actually exaggerated that perspective angle. I do have it all the way up the drawing, sloping higher on the right-hand side than in the drawing, which again can be a great effect to go for, and we're always free to distort our reference in any way we want. It's just that I wasn't intending to. Now you'll see one of the things I've done now to try and overcome the problem of the disappearing columns. Instead of just hatching, I've switched to cross hatching. I've put an additional line in which is no longer horizontal, which does help create an immediate visual distinction between the line work, which is completely vertical, and the line work, which has this diagonal now across it. And so while it doesn't give the columns that lovely sunshine effect that I would have liked them to have, it certainly does make them at least stand out more. And there's not much I can do about the steps really, but I do add these railings to just try and add some sort of distracting design. And I figure that the railings fit in nicely with the people I've drawn there. So I've pretty much finished this daily drawing exercise, and exercise it certainly has been. I feel like I've had a bit of a workout. Look, number of issues I'm not particularly happy with, and overall it's just overworked. It should have been a simpler drawing to capture the effect of the sunshine, which really was what I was more after. But as in a drawing exercise, or any drawing really, I've learned something. I've learned a number of things, and that's great. Why don't you have a go and see what you can learn? Or maybe you don't need to learn the same lessons I've learned. The photo will be on my channel community page, so why not have a go with this Art Gallery of New South Wales scene? But look, whatever you draw and however you draw it, make sure you have fun. See you next time. Bye.